A child. Just like any other child. Curious. With an unlimited imagination. Full of questions. Asking questions. Asking too many questions. A child. Like all children, with the potential to change the world. The Einstein we all know. The wise, old man. A genius with an extraordinary intellect. As if there was no past. As if he suddenly appeared out of nowhere. But he was once a child, too. And like every person, he had a childhood that shaped him, a past, a story that made him who he was. His story begins on March 14, 1879, in a small town called Ulm in Germany. Albert was born as the first child of Pauline and Hermann Einstein, a Jewish family, during a time when German Jews were just starting to gain rights to own land, access higher education, and pursue different professions. He had a very happy childhood with his younger sister, Maya. His mother Pauline was a particularly strong, fearless, and intelligent woman. One could say that Albert took after his mother in this regard. She encouraged and supported her husband, Hermann, a bed salesman, in finding new business opportunities. His father Hermann was a man curious about the new technologies and sciences of his time. It was Hermann who gave Albert the first gift that would spark his curiosity, a compass. Yes, a simple compass. He was 4 or 5 years old. The needle of the compass he held in his hand always pointed to a fixed location, no matter where it was turned. Albert was shocked by this centuries-old simple technology. Later, he would describe the experience, saying, "Up until then, I believed that you had to touch something, to make contact with it to move it. But at that moment, I realized that there was a much deeper force behind the workings of the world. That deep force was electromagnetism." Discovered with contributions from names like Faraday and Maxwell, electromagnetism was the biggest event in the 19th century world. This fundamental force of nature would cause a technological revolution within a few years. In Germany, there was a rapid transition from kerosene to electricity. Hermann Einstein, a good entrepreneur, saw this opportunity and moved his family to Munich to set up a factory producing electric dynamos. Naturally, Albert grew up surrounded by electricity, machines, and the mystery of electricity from a young age. He was fortunate. His uncles, family friends would constantly talk to Albert about electricity, the working principles of machines. So, from a very young age, he was introduced to the subject that would later form the foundation of his work. Electromagnetism was his family's business. And electromagnetism would become Albert's business, too. In the meantime, at the age of 10, Albert began to improve himself. He read Euclid, slept and woke up with a geometry book that he would later call his holy book, and that would change his life. He devoured all the popular science books he could find. Contrary to popular belief, he was a child who never got bored of studying or reading. There was only one thing he hated: school. Especially the rigid, uncreative system that reflected the despotism of German society and culture at the time was suffocating him. When he reached high school, he faced another obstacle: it was time to join the German army. During this time, in 1894, Hermann Einstein made a radical decision due to the increasing competition and decided to move his factory to Pavia, Italy, and take his family with him, except for Albert. He stayed in Munich to finish his schooling. However, as mentioned, he did not like school. He constantly had problems with his teachers and the school administration. One day, he had enough and went to the doctor. He got an indefinite leave due to extreme fatigue and burnout, and left the school never to return. He then went to Italy to be with his family. At the age of 15, Albert made a radical decision and dropped out of school. He told his family, "Don't worry. I don't intend to be a bum. I have a plan." His plan was this: somehow finish high school and earn the right to take the entrance exam for the Swiss Polytechnic University. Of course, he had some time for this, and in the meantime, he had the opportunity to relax at the family home in Pavia. According to his sister Maya's friends, introverted Albert's greatest pleasure was riding his bike and daydreaming. Having escaped from the oppressive school, he also spent time playing with electricity at his father's factory, trying to better understand its power. In fact, this was the most important time that made Albert Einstein. The laboratory in the factory had become an amazing playground for him. The brilliant theoretical physicist Albert that we know had received a fair share of practical experience during this time. But there was a problem. Albert still didn't have a high school diploma and was a high school dropout. He didn't even have a nationality. Yes, he had renounced his German citizenship to avoid military service. And when he failed the up portion of the entrance exam for the Swiss Polytechnic, he didn't have many options left. His father arranged for him to attend a high school in Aarau, Switzerland, and reluctantly, he started school there. However, this would be a turning point for him. This school was nothing like the system in Germany. It had a fantastic physics laboratory and offered both traditional education and the fun intellectual freedom he wanted. It was here that he would fully experience the joy of being a scientist. Meanwhile, in 1894, Hermann Einstein decided to move his factory to Pavia, Italy, due to the increasing competition, and he decided to take his family with him. Except for Albert, who stayed in Munich to finish school. However, he didn't like school. He had constant problems with his teachers and the school administration. One day, he couldn't take it anymore and went to the doctor. He was diagnosed with extreme fatigue and burnout and took indefinite leave, never to return to school. He would then join his family in Italy. At the age of 15, Albert made the radical decision to drop out of school and run away. He told his family, "Don't worry, I don't intend to become a bum. I have a plan." The plan was to somehow finish high school and earn the right to take the entrance exam for the Swiss Polytechnic University. Of course, he had some time for that, and in the meantime, he had the opportunity to enjoy himself at the family home in Pavia. But according to the friends of his sister Maya, the introverted Albert's greatest pleasure was to ride his bicycle and daydream. Having escaped the school that bothered him, he also spent time in his father's factory, trying to understand and play with electricity. In fact, this was the most important time that made Albert Einstein who he was. The laboratory in the factory had become a fantastic playground for him. So, the great theoretical physicist Albert had taken his fair share of practical experience. But there was a problem. Albert still didn't even have a high school diploma, he was a high school dropout. He didn't even have a nationality. Yes, he had given up his German citizenship to avoid military service. And when he failed the up portion of the exam for the Swiss Polytechnic, he didn't have many options left. His father arranged a high school for him in Aarau, Switzerland, and Albert reluctantly started school there. However, this would become a turning point for him. This school was nothing like the system in Germany. With an excellent physics laboratory, he found the fun and intellectual freedom he wanted alongside traditional education. He would taste what it was like to be a scientist right here. In the laboratory, he would connect compass needles to batteries, witnessing the formation of a magnetic field due to electric current and realizing that both forces were different forms of the same force. He had to see it for himself because he wouldn't believe without seeing. He would take a magnet and see how iron particles formed patterns. When he learned that light was actually an electromagnetic wave moving through space, he would find the purpose of his life, in a way. Yes. It was during this time that the first of Albert's famous thought experiments, which occupied his mind as a teenager, emerged. Riding a light wave. Yes, Albert's thought experiments. His ability to solve even the most complex issues by simplifying them and turning them into a game. He asked a very simple question here. If light is a wave, then no matter how fast it goes, you should be able to catch its peaks or troughs. In that case, if you could ride that wave, what would you see? What would happen? Would the light remain constant? Or would time remain constant? Could you go on the same wave peak forever? And would this feel like a single moment to us? However, all efforts to find such a difference at the speed of light were in vain. Whatever they did, the speed of light was constant. In every direction. While the physics world was not yet ready, Albert had already conceived of the concept of captive matter in his mind. There should not be such a matter. Light was independent of all laws of motion that governed the world. An exception. However, in 1900, Albert had just graduated and was not in a position to prove it. On the other hand, his dreams of working at the university had also fallen apart due to his conflict with Professor Weber. Meanwhile, his father's business was not going well and Albert needed urgent work. During this time, he sent numerous letters to all institutes and universities he could find. He reached out to every professor he could, even his father intervened and wrote letters to a few universities for his son. But Albert was left in the middle. No institute, no university accepted him. Universities were rejecting Albert Einstein. As if this wasn't enough trouble, his love life wasn't going well either. His entire family, especially his mother, was not happy about Albert marrying Mileva. According to his mother, Mileva was too independent. She couldn't cook for him, sew his socks, or take care of a child while studying. "If you marry her, I won't forgive you," she had come to the point of saying. Meanwhile, Mileva's grades were not very good either. She couldn't pass her exams. When his mother asked him mockingly, "What will happen to your dear Mileva now?" he replied, "What will happen? Of course, she will be my beloved wife." At this time, Albert had invited Mileva to a romantic vacation by Lake Como. This vacation would not end well, especially for Mileva. Yes. Mileva was pregnant, couldn't finish school, Albert was unemployed, and his family was against this marriage. When Mileva failed her final exams, she would return to Hungary to give birth to the child with her family. In 1902, a girl named Liesel would be born. Liesel, about whom little is known, was already very unlucky in every way. From his letters, it is understood that Albert wanted to give up on the child. He had just found a job with the help of his friend Marcel and started working at the patent office in Bern. He didn't want to lose this difficult job because of a scandal. During this time, the baby became ill and there is no record of Liesel. According to some sources, Liesel had died. Albert had never seen his daughter. At this time, his father had also become seriously ill and gave permission for Albert to marry before passing away on the same day. What happened to Albert after these dramatic events? Not much, to be honest. Perhaps his weakest point was emotions. He always talked about not allowing his emotions to affect him. The death of a child he had never seen, the death of his father. Yes. It wouldn't affect him much. This attitude and character was not good news for Mileva either. Because when they got married in 1903, they were happy for a while, but Albert was preoccupied with his work and especially his physics problems. The woman he admired for her intelligence and confidence would always be in the background, taking care of their home and their second child, their son Hans Albert, who was born in 1904. But of course, everything was fine for Albert. He had a job. He had his family. And now, he could focus on the physics problems he was most curious about. But for Albert, everything was going well. He had a job, a family, and could finally focus on his true passion, physics problems. Strangely enough, Albert also enjoyed his mundane job at the patent office. It provided the necessary calmness for him to solve his problems. He had no pressure on him. Additionally, he and his friends had formed a club called the Olympia Academy. Among them was his close friend Michel Besso, and they would go on nature walks, discuss physics and philosophy, and debate science-related topics in Bern. Finally, 1905 had arrived. It was the year of the Annus Mirabilis, or the miracle year. Albert was now convinced of one thing: the speed of light was constant, no matter what. It could not change. In other words, regardless of where you are or how fast you measure it, it must remain constant. Speed is the measure of distance traveled in a given unit of time. Therefore, if the speed of light is constant, nothing else can be constant. The light had started to shine now. It would illuminate the world. It was gradually shining in Albert's mind. The question was simple. What if time is not constant? There are things that people are afraid to think about, things that have been accepted as true for thousands of years without questioning them. People accept them without questioning. This was like questioning one of those things. Albert had asked this question to Michel Besso during a nature walk. He had asked for his help. Well, if you can call it that. He was constantly talking. Then, before he could finish his sentence, he had run home in the midst of Besso's shocked looks. The next morning, he went to Besso and said, "Thank you very much. I found the answer to the problem." Albert had once said, "It's as if I'm the only one asking these questions. It's as if I'm the only one trying to find the answers. Like a child's silly questions. But I guess I've never stopped being a child. I've always had a childlike curiosity. I've always tried to ask the simplest but most important questions. I'm still asking them. Could God have created the universe differently? If I were God, how would I create it?" Yes. Albert was trying to learn God's way of thinking. And sometimes he had succeeded. He had opened a tiny window, and even if there was only one line, he had read God's mind. Albert. A child. And really, it's his story. Not the answers he gave, but the questions he asked. And his story will continue.